Hello, friends, and welcome to Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and help you engage with public policy in the great state of Texas. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and today we're starting with some good news, talking all things environment with friend of the program Luke Metzger, who serves as the Executive Director of Environment Texas. Luke joins us to share the good news from the November elections related to the Centennial Parks Conservation Fund and the EPA's new rules related to methane emissions. Spoiler, Texas is not handling the rules well, but Luke gives us an update on those rules, solar policy, the TCEQ's recently released Priority Action Plan, and more. Then, Texas Impact's Climate Action Fellow Becca Edwards joins to give her reaction and share her Lenten project related to methane. More information about those issues and all of Texas Impact's resources, including our Texas Faith Votes resources, can be found on our website at texasimpact.org. If you have questions or need more information, you can always reach out at scott@texasimpact.org. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with Luke Metzger. Joining us for today's conversation is Luke Metzger, Executive Director of Environment Texas and a longtime amazing office mate. Luke, it's so good to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, it's so great to be back on, Scott. Good to see you.
I know there's a lot going on in the world. How's your year starting off personally before we jump into the work?
Yeah, pretty good. My son is about to graduate high school, and he's also going to get his, or he already earned his Eagle Scout, so that's exciting. And then my daughters are doing really well, doing gymnastics. So yeah, life's good.
A lot of good things in the world where maybe that's not always the case, but we are going to start with some good election news today. You started the year with a big success. Tell us more about the Centennial Parks Conservation Fund.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, I think we talked about this probably, 2 years ago on Weekly Witness, which I think Weekly Witness broke the story of working on parks funding.
Broke the story. We're here for all your news, folks.
That's right. But yeah, ultimately, we were able to get the Texas legislature to invest $1 billion with a B to buy land for new state parks. Last year was the 100-year anniversary of the state park system. And given that the state's growing so rapidly, we know that we don't currently have enough land to meet the demand for recreation for people to go camping and hiking, as well as not enough land for the critters of the state to provide habitat for wildlife. And so given that the legislature had a $32 billion surplus they needed to spend, we thought last year was a good time to ask for money for state parks. And thankfully the legislature agreed and then went to the ballot, and Texas voters also agreed, approving the measure 76%. And so now the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, has access to $1 billion that is earning interest. So they expect the fund to earn, $50 or $60 million in interest every year. And they already have a list of, I think, 50 parks or pieces of land that they're considering purchasing, and hope to buy at least one park this year. But I think, thanks to that funds, we're going to see dozens of new state parks purchased and opened in the coming years. So very exciting.
Love that. So thank you to all the voters who turned out in November for that important election. More good news as we continue the conversation today. You are leading a group that's working on taking on methane pollution in the state. And the EPA recently announced stronger rules regarding methane emissions from the oil and gas industry. What are some ways these rules stand to benefit the environment in Texas?
Yeah, well, the rules cut pollution from oil and gas operations, and we know that methane pollution is a particular problem. It's a very potent greenhouse gas, very dangerous for our climate, and so the new rules will require oil and gas companies to cut their methane emissions by about 80%. So that'll reduce emissions by 58 million tons by 2038, and that's going to, according to the EPA, yield climate and smog health benefits of $97 to $98 billion, and it will recover enough wasted natural gas that right now is either leaking or being burned or directly vented to the atmosphere. It'll save enough gas to heat about 8 million homes for the winter. And so it's a real long overdue measure because, just the loss of methane from leaks or these, flaring and venting is just real wasteful and dirty, for both human health and the environment. So we're going to see huge benefits from it.
Love that. And we're going to save Texas's response to these rules for a future question. So give us just a second on that. But talk us through the process about what it looks like when these rules are implemented. What happens once the EPA announces the rules? How do states implement those? Talk to us generally about that process.
Sure. Well, so in the case of the methane rule, Texas has 2 years to develop a state plan to implement it, and they largely have to follow federal standards, but they have some flexibility to customize the rule for Texas. And at some point in the next 2 years, we don't know when, there will be public comment opportunities and stakeholder engagement, and then ultimately, after Texas submits a plan, the EPA will decide, whether to approve it, or if it's too weak, which advocates worry will happen, EPA can instead reject the plan and implement a federal plan instead.
And so there will be opportunity in the course of the next couple of years for folks to weigh in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the requirements of the state's planning process.
So it turns out that state leaders here in the great state of Texas might not be fans of the rules. How has Texas responded to the announcement?
Yeah, unfortunately, as Texas often does when the EPA adopts new environmental standards, they're suing to try and block the rule. So Attorney General Paxton was the first out of the gates to file a lawsuit. He was soon followed by a coalition of 25 other states that are also suing, mostly red states. It's real unfortunate, because this is a rule that polling shows 2/3 of Texans support, and even many people in the oil industry support the rule. Like Occidental Petroleum, BP, and other major oil companies recognize that this is a serious problem, and we have the technology to reduce the pollution cost effectively, and so it just really doesn't make sense, unfortunately, that the state of Texas is doing that. We do know that there are some parts of the oil industry that do oppose it, of course, and they have a lot of influence with the state oil regulatory agency, the Railroad Commission, and the Attorney General, and seemingly, those institutions are deciding to side with, a portion of the oil industry over public, opinion and, what public health and the environment.
All right. Great state of Texas, friends. Along those lines, the TCEQ recently released a priority action plan for reducing climate-harming emissions in Texas. What are your thoughts on that plan?
Yeah, so this plan was a result of a grant that the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality got from the EPA as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act, which, of course, is the major climate investment law passed by Congress a few years ago. And so it's great news. The state of Texas got, I believe, a $3 million grant to kind of put together the plan. And it's significant because the state of Texas has never developed, a real inventory of where the pollution is coming from or a plan to how to reduce it. And so, it's exciting that, we actually have that in place now. Unfortunately, though, the plan never mentions climate change except, as footnotes, to link, mentioning studies that mention it or other things like that. And there's no requirements that any of the policies that they identify are actually implemented. So it's, we have to take it for what it is, but I think it's significant, that the state of Texas now has, identified these sources of pollution and come up with some ideas to reduce it, and ultimately by putting together this plan, Texas then becomes eligible for even larger what are called climate pollution reduction grants from the EPA. So hopefully by doing this plan, Texas is able to get some funding to support pollution reduction measures. So I think it's significant.
Yeah, you mentioned sources of pollution. According to the plan, who are the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases here in Texas?
Yeah, so nationally, the biggest sources of pollution is transportation, so kind of cars and trucks, followed by power plants and industry. At Texas, it's different. Perhaps not surprisingly, we see that industry, and that means all the oil and gas drilling, the refineries, the chemical plants. They're number one in Texas, making up about 42% of all emissions. Transportation is then number two at 24%. Power plants at 21%, and agriculture also 7%. So this is the first time we've had a general idea. In the past, we've sort of seen emissions in Texas as roughly a third. So transportation, power plants, and industry each being about a third. And so by developing this plan, we have more precise estimates of where the pollution's coming from. And for me, we've made great progress in reducing pollution from the power plant sector. A lot of coal-fired power plants have retired in recent years, and more wind and solar is online. There's much more electric vehicles, on the roads now. So we're seeing some progress on transportation emissions. But industry, that's the area that's the real thorny problem, and this new data backs that up.
Luke, it seems like the EPA rules for reducing emissions dovetail very nicely with the state's priority action plan, especially in the area of improving emissions from the industrial sector. Is it possible that we could make progress on these areas?
Yeah, that's right. And, I think as we mentioned earlier, the methane rule, I think is a big example of how we can make progress in reducing pollution from oil and gas, which is a big part of our industrial sector emissions. So that's a big step forward. EPA is also considering tougher standards on a number of chemicals, including vinyl chloride, which is a toxic chemical used to make things like PVC pipe. And listeners might remember it was spilled during the train accident in East Palestine, Ohio last year, and a lot of concern around that. EPA also has new soot standards that will impact refineries and chemical plants. So a lot of great initiatives coming out of EPA that will hopefully take a bite out of the pollution from industry.
All right, since I have you, I want to take a shift to talk a little bit about solar. The Energy Information Administration projected that solar and battery storage will make up 81% of new U.S. electric generating capacity in 2024. I think we've talked about this before. Texas has great solar resources. What are some successes and challenges with increasing solar electrical generation in Texas?
Yeah, you're right. Texas has the best, solar radiation, potential in the nation. And for a long time, though, we just weren't taking advantage of it. Just a tiny fraction of a percent, of electricity came from solar. But that's changed dramatically in just the last few years, where solar has increased 8 times in just the last 5 years. There were a number of days this spring where solar and wind together produced 75% of the electricity in all of Texas. Texas is now #1 for utility scale solar, ahead of California. So a lot of really exciting things happening, and that's good news, certainly for the environment. The more solar energy that's produced, that means less coming from dirty coal or gas power plants. plants. It's also a huge savings for consumers because, of course, the fuel for solar energy, the sun, is free, right? And so the more solar energy we're producing, the lower electric bills, so saving consumers billions of dollars. And then we also know that thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, in part, which provides significant tax credits to develop new wind and solar, we expect to see a ton of new solar energy produced in the coming years. So that's all good news. The challenges, though, are one, we don't have enough transmission lines right now to bring the power from the sunniest parts of the state in West Texas, for example, to our cities. And so that's going to be a significant constraint. We can build a solar farm, but if we can't transmit the electricity, that does us no good. And then perhaps more significantly is that as we've seen a big rise in solar energy, we've also started to see a backlash against it. For example, after Winter Storm Uri, Governor Abbott, kind of falsely claimed on Fox News and others that, wind and solar were primarily reasons to blame. That was not true. Federal reports came that, but we've started to see a backlash in the legislature. So last session, there were bills to create onerous new fees on solar and wind, and really tough permitting processes, and even a bill that would outright ban wind and solar. And thankfully, the worst of those bills did not pass in the last legislative session, but we expect them to come back, and it's a real threat that I think next legislative session, defense for renewables is going to be certainly one of our top priorities.
And what's the conversation when you talk to people running for office on that? Is it support renewables? It's good for the environment, good for jobs, good for Texas. Like what's the message you're talking to folks?
Yeah, that's certainly our message. Is that we know that solar is really popular. It's the most popular form of energy, and so we try to communicate that as because many politicians they themselves recognize that and are excited about solar themselves, or are glad to know that Texans also support it. So that's a big part, and then just stressing the significant benefits that we're getting out of it. The saving of reducing air pollution, saving water. Because a lot of our fossil fuel generated power plants require a lot of water, which we often can't afford during periods of drought. And then the consumer savings, the economic development, certainly. And I think most people get that, but there are certainly some people who I think feel, particularly in a Republican primary election, that bashing renewables plays well to their base, and so we have that to deal with as well, unfortunately.
Yes, we do. And friends, runoff elections coming up in May and big elections in November. We'll be talking a lot more about all of that. But Luke, beyond climate and air quality, what other environmental issues are on your radar right now? What else are you watching?
Sure. Well, a lot of different things. One thing we're doing work around is water quality continuing. So, and that's both industrial pollution, that going, contaminating our rivers, lakes, streams, the Gulf of Mexico. Right now, we're paying attention to new standards that the Environmental Protection Agency is considering for slaughterhouses. So there's Texas has over 400 kind of meat and poultry facilities, and those facilities generate a ton of pollution that go into our rivers and lakes, and ultimately, find their way into the Gulf of Mexico, causing dead zones, for aquatic life, and causing, real threats to human health, as we see fecal bacteria in our beaches. And so thankfully the EPA is considering new standards to reduce that pollution. So we're doing some work on that. We're also doing work around drinking water quality, including continuing our fight against lead in the school drinking water. We know that too many schools, more than 2/3 of schools in Texas that have done testing have found lead in their drinking water. And that is, of course, bad for our children. Lead is very harmful to children's developing brains and can cause, loss of IQ points and behavioral problems. And so it's critical that we're ensuring clean water for our kids. Thanks. The EPA has new standards that require schools now to finally test. They didn't even have to test before. So over the next 5 years, every school in Texas every elementary and middle school in Texas and daycares will have to do testing. But it's going to be up to us then to actually push the school districts, not just to release that information, but to do something about it, to install the filters, on the drinking water fountains, or, remove the lead pipes or other kind of sources of contamination.
Wait, I just want to make sure I was listening right. Did they exempt out high schools from that?
That's right.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
All right. Luke, really appreciate the time today. I want to give you a shot here at the end. I know folks will want to find more information. Anything you want to shamelessly plug before we close out today, or any suggestions for where we can go to learn more?
Sure. Well, yeah, definitely love to encourage people to check out our website. We have environmenttexas.org. That's our Environment Texas is our lobbying arm. And so that's what we do most, our work, at the legislature and elsewhere. We also have a research and policy arm. So Environment Texas Research and Policy Center, that website's environmenttexascenter.org. So lots of great content, both of those websites about environmental issues. And then, of course, you can follow us on social media. We're on all the channels, and definitely if any of the issues that I talked about today are of interest to the listeners, please reach out. We need support for all these campaigns all around Texas, and gladly would partner with folks on these campaigns.
All right, Luke, really appreciate the time today. Appreciate all you do. Keep fighting the good fight, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Scott.
Joining us for today's reaction is Texas Impact's Climate Action Fellow, Becca Edwards, friend of the program, frequent contributor. Becca, how you feeling today?
Feeling good. Thanks for having me, Scott.
That's a theme today. I love that people are feeling good. Luke was feeling good. He had some good news to share on the environment. Let's continue the good vibes for at least a few seconds here. You were also excited about the EPA's rules on methane. How do you think Luke handled that? Why are you excited?
No, I thought Luke's analysis was great. I'm also excited about the methane rules. I think the fact that we have the technology available for the oil and gas industry to reduce their leaks of methane, to save more of that methane gas to use for energy, to use for heating and for cooking, I think those are all good things, and I'm pleased to see the federal government making progress in that area. I'm kind of waiting to see if the state of Texas follows through and decides to take some of those recommendations into action.
Well, we will cross our fingers and hope and pray and do all of the things there. Becca, to take people behind the curtain, you helped me significantly in getting ready for that conversation with Luke. And one of the things that you wanted to ask about was how the Priority Action Plan relates to these methane rules. So anything to add there?
So the Priority Action Plan, that's an exciting document that was produced by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. It's one of the first times we've done an inventory of just where the emissions of greenhouse gases are coming from in the state of Texas. I think, as we suspected, the industrial sector is one of the biggest culprits for emissions, and the reason that the methane rules dovetail so nicely with that Priority Action Plan is that those rules are designed to curb a lot of those emissions. The oil and gas industry has a lot of what's called fugitive methane emissions, or emissions that escape from equipment and pipelines and things like that. So we have the ability to clean up some of those leaks. It benefits the environment, it benefits air quality, which benefits lots of people in Texas, and it benefits the climate, and it benefits the energy companies themselves, because they can use that saved gas for economic purposes, which benefits everybody. So I'm pleased to see the methane rules and pleased to see the Priority Action Plan, and I think that we can be creative and put those together for the benefit of all of us.
I love that. That was a really long list of things and entities that benefit. So continuing with the feel-good theme, one is where as many Christians are celebrating Lent. I don't know if that's what we would define as the feel-good season of the year, but here we are. you have been working on a project this Lenten season related to methane. Every time I get on my Instagram, I feel like I'm reminded of this. So talk to us about that project and what people can do with it.
Yeah, so Lent is a season when we think about the ways that we have not lived up to the way that we are created to be in community with one another and living in community with God. And I think now's an excellent time to think about the ways that we fail to love our neighbor through our care for the environment. And so I created the Methane Lent series as an opportunity to spend a little bit of time each day reflecting on the way that Christians are called to creation and to promote some ideas about how to take action. So on each of those, in addition to a little bit of reflection, a quote from someone who's thinking about these things, there's an opportunity to take action, maybe to sign a petition or to learn more about, for instance, the new methane rules, or to learn more about Laudato Si or the Pope's most recent encyclical. So the idea is just to take a sort of different spin on the kinds of self-reflection and work that Christians do during Lent to figure out how better to live in the world, especially when it relates to the way we live in our environment.
I have loved this series throughout Lent and really appreciate you putting in the time on that and appreciate you taking the time today to be with us. Thanks for all you do, Becca.
Thanks so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with Luke and Becca, and I hope you enjoyed a little bit of good news in a year that is feeling challenging. And in the midst of those challenges, I hope you don't retreat into your shell, but rather that you further engage your communities and congregations in civic engagement work. You can make a difference, and Texas Impact has tools for you to do just that. Again, check out our website at texasimpact.org, join a team, get engaged in the Texas Faith Votes campaign. Find all of the resources at texasimpact.org. While you're there, I hope you'll take a moment to sign up to be a member of Texas Impact. Your membership supports this podcast and all of the work to engage Texans of faith to advocate for a more just and equitable Texas. If you have questions about any of it, please reach out. You can catch me at scott@texasimpact.org. And with that, I think it's time to close out this episode, so remember, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnet, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.